Thank you all for being here. I know we've had a long day, a long evening. So I want to thank you for joining me after both a long day and a long night. Over the last several weeks, voters all across our state and across the political spectrum proudly participated in our democracy. Whether they chose to vote from home, vote early in person, or vote yesterday in their local precinct, over 5.5 million Michiganders exercised their most sacred right, the right to select our leaders by voting in free and fair elections. I'm immensely grateful for the thousands of poll workers, challengers, observers, everyone who came together, along with our 1,520 local clerks and 83 county clerks, to ensure that our election yesterday and throughout the month proceeded smoothly, peacefully, and without any significant or widespread disruptions. Years of planning went into ensuring we could protect every voter and every election official in this election, and I'm pleased to report that the preparation we endured led to a successful 2024 election. I'm also grateful to the voters of Michigan who once again, for the third straight election cycle, turned out in record numbers to have their voice heard and to help define our collective future. Whether they chose to be among the 2.2 million who voted from home, the 1.2 million who voted early in person, or the over 2 million who voted in person yesterday, Michiganders were able to cast their ballots safely, securely, and conveniently. As in past elections, we saw thousands of new voters register and vote on Election Day, nearly 22,000 overall, and many were in East Lansing, Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, and here in Detroit. These numbers were the result of voter education efforts and programs we implemented along with partners in the business community, the faith community, and many others throughout the state who helped every citizen have rightly placed faith in participating in our elections. So I'm glad to see that work pay off. Reports from our team members all across the state yesterday showed things that were incredible. When there were issues that emerged, they were resolved quickly, and voters who needed assistance were directed to where they could receive it quickly and efficiently. Polling places were relatively calm and clean, and all that said, yesterday went very smoothly, but it was not without incident. We are aware of non-credible bomb threats that targeted some polling locations in Washtenaw, Wayne, Genesee, and Saginaw counties. The FBI has issued statements officially confirming that those were tied to Russia. Last night, after the polls closed, doctored videos circulated online with false allegations of widespread voter fraud, and the incoming president himself, wrongly claimed there was significant law enforcement presence in Detroit and Philadelphia. Those false claims were easily debunked, and I'm grateful to so many of our partners for helping us ensure trusted information ruled the day. After the polls closed, we saw poll workers work through the night, carefully validating the signatures of thousands of mail-in ballots that were dropped off in the last hours that polls were open. That took time. They had to deliver those unofficial tabulations to counties, and then those counties uploaded those results into their systems and posted them online. That also took time. But here we are, just shy of noon on Wednesday, and by and large, that process is complete. One of the best images I saw last night was just after 10 p.m. when Flint announced that they had completed their full tabulation of every vote well ahead of schedule. Everyone cheered and congratulated each other on a job well done and a significant improvement over their process in 2020. That, to me, is the story of yesterday. And that, again, on this day, is what I'm grateful for. The professional, tireless work of election officials over the course of this year, and especially these last several weeks, reinforces that these professionals, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, represent the best of us. May we all continue to stand with them to ensure we remain a country that lives up to that one person, one vote promise embedded in our Constitution. May none of us give up on that ideal. It is who we are as a nation and as a democracy. Thanks. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Secretary Benson,
Yeah.
I know you were
Yeah.
I know you were very hopeful that we would get some results here in Michigan and be one of the first swing states to actually complete the count. Were there any specific challenges that county clerks ran into when trying to complete their tabulation processes that resulted in us not being the first swing state?
Yeah, I think We made clear all along that it would take time for counties to report those unofficial results. What we saw over the last 12 hours or so was, particularly in large counties like Wayne, there were no problems with counting or transmitting those results, and that's why we knew things had been tabulated. But it did take a very long time to get the data to upload into the county website. And the Board of Elections, the Bureau of Elections, is working with the county to find out exactly what happened. But yeah, throughout the hours that unfolded late into the evening and early this morning, it was simply just waiting for that data to then be uploaded and appear online that was taking so long. And we'll look into, what connections, whether it was internet connections or others that impacted that. But at the bottom line is it did take time. And here we are earlier than we were in 2020, able to say that the tabulation is for the most part complete. The other thing I'll say, and that I emphasized last night, is that we know there's still about 6,000 outstanding military and overseas ballots. If they're postmarked by yesterday and are received by Tuesday, November 12th, they will be added to these unofficial results as well.
One quick follow-up question to that. Were there any particular counties or cities throughout the state that had any hiccups or challenges that made it a little bit more lengthy for them to finish their process?
Nothing significantly widespread. That's what was so interesting as the hours unfolded. And one of the things I noticed as I talked to clerks and showed up in Huntington Place just to get eyes on the situation and see what was going on, was that people were exhausted, in part because of the long early voting period, especially here in Detroit. That was very helpful in that it created options for people to vote and extended the hours for pre-processing. But people were also exhausted by midnight or 2 a.m. And I think that is also something to take note of. But yet they stayed through the night. And again, that tabulation occurred on schedule. We were expecting Detroit to be done tabulating in or around midnight. They were done a few hours after. And with that, sent the results over to Wayne County, which then uploaded them. And it was really the time it took from when it got to the county to when it appeared online, that upload, that was really where we saw the slowness occur. And, I'll also, I think, attribute it to the fact that everyone was being so careful. We knew the immense scrutiny that this process was under. And I think everyone was very much on edge and just trying to make sure they did everything right, as they all, of course, did. But I think that contributed to some of the careful, slower actions, which we would prefer over speed and efficiency that leads to errors. Yeah.
Secretary, are you able to clarify turnout numbers for yesterday? Is it larger than 2020, or do you have the exact numbers? Yeah.
We are, I think, we're about where we were in 2020 at this point. Now we're still waiting again for those overseas ballots and others to come in. So it'll be a few days before we know the final number, but we're at least at above 5.5 million, which is where we were in 2020. So the way we're looking at it, as I mentioned, is we've really now had 3 back-to-back. This is our 3rd straight election cycle where voters turned out in record numbers. And that's what we're seeing as a victory. If turnout had dipped significantly under that 5.5, I think that would have been a cause for concern, perhaps, but that's not what we saw. We were essentially about where we were at 2020, give or take a few thousand, and we'll figure those specifics out in the days ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about, you talked about the doctor video.
Yeah.
How you knew it was doctor, how you processed that, and then how you ultimately responded to it. And then second part, somewhat related, former president comes up with that through social post. What do you think he was trying to do? And then how you sort of process that and then responded to it?
Yeah. To the latter point, it's the former president saying there was a significant law enforcement present in Detroit and Philadelphia. I was grateful that DPD quickly debunked that, as well as our office, and said quite clearly that everything was calm and smooth. And to the extent that law enforcement were showing up as partners, it was simply that. There was no indication of anything arising. The second, with regards to the video, I learned of quickly or shortly after midnight. One view of the video was very clearly wasn't recorded in Detroit. I think anyone who actually lives in Detroit would recognize that it wasn't, was clearly not an accurate portrayal of reality. And I think that enabled us to work with the media to quickly debunk it. What both of those things said to me, though, however, is that I imagine, I don't have any data to suggest it, but I worry and imagine that there was much more planned to drop, potentially, to kind of create confusion and chaos in the hours following the election in an effort to potentially lay seeds to challenge results in the future. And we, of course, didn't see that play out, but the way in which and the timing in which both of those things occurred seemed more aligned with what we had seen in 2020, which were seeds beginning to be planted to potentially allow for or lead to challenging results, or at the very least, false rumors to be spread, creating anger about the results. If those who were behind the video wanted to fan those flames anymore.
And on the
Yeah.
bomb threats, can you elaborate on the Russian connection you cited?
Yeah, I think much like my colleague in Georgia, the state of Georgia mentioned yesterday, we received similar bomb threats in the counties that I mentioned. They were quickly addressed. Law enforcement visited the locations, confirmed that they were essentially considered a swatting incident. No voters were blocked from voting, which was in the midst of it our biggest concern, as well as making sure that they were not credible threats. And then the FBI confirmed later that the source of the threat, I believe it was an email, but the source of the threat came from a Russian IP address. Yeah.
Yesterday, you frequently said that a lot of sites pointed to high turnout in
Mhm.
elections statewide, but Detroit, it lags behind. It looks like it'll be lower than 2020, 2016 even. Do you have any kind of take on why turnout in Detroit ended up being not only low, but much lower than projections even in the weeks leading up to the election?
Yeah, we'll see how the final numbers lay out. What we were watching were the statewide numbers across the board, and seeing them be basically on par with our highest turnout election in history makes me really proud and shows that, in fact, turnout was through the roof. It's easy to remember years before 2020 when turnout was typically under 5 million. We crossed 5 million once in 2008 and then blew past that in 2020 to 5.5. And so our hope was that we would meet or exceed 5.5. We did that, and that I consider a success. As far as individual geographical breakdowns, we're going to be looking into those numbers once things become more clear and finalized. I think, and I did see all around the city a lot of people voting throughout the process. I think the local or the Detroit City Clerk estimated turnout was at about 51%, which is below the state average, but not alarmingly so. But we'll look into all those numbers, I think, in the days ahead as we get through the canvassing process, and then can assess or prognosticate how to address any dips in turnout in particular localities in the months and years ahead.
Secretary, you mentioned the 6,000 military and overseas ballots that are
Yeah.
still outstanding. Just because so many of these races remain so close, do you have a sense of how many other ballots might have been cast that are not currently being reported and where those might be?
No, you mean ballots that were sent out and not returned on time?
Are there any other results beyond those 6,000 votes that were cast but have not currently been reported? And if so, do you know how many?
Not that I'm aware of. The last update I received, there were still some communities in Wayne. I believe those have been reported, and still some communities in Kalamazoo County. I believe those have mostly been reported. So it's primarily those 6,000. But I haven't. There's multiple different locations of things being reported, and so it's hard to track all of them and know which who's talking about what. But in terms of our qualified voter file, a lot of that stuff is still being uploaded and hasn't yet been posted on our website. All of that will play out in the days ahead. But certainly for close races that exist, the biggest and most significant, I would estimate, outstanding chunk of votes is coming from those overseas ballots. And I'll mention it's not a guarantee that all 6,000 will return by Tuesday, but we all should be, and we will be monitoring that so that we can ensure any updates are made to results to reflect those incoming ballots.
I just wanted to revisit numbers briefly. My notes are correct from Monday when you spoke. 2 million absentee, 1.2 million early. So does that leave 2.3 million yesterday?
We got to up about, I believe, 2.2 million mailed in ballots because a lot came in yesterday. And so that's why you saw the number increase since Monday. And so we were at 2.2 in the mail-in ballots, 1.2 in the early in-person votes, and then another 2 and change. We're still seeing that number. We have at least 2 million who voted yesterday, and that gets us to about 2.5. I'm sorry, 5.5.
What's if I can on the threats, the bogus threats? Were they targeting urban areas, minority voters here in outstate?
I mean, Washtenaw, Genesee, Saginaw, and Wayne were the 4 counties where we saw those threats. So you could make your judgments about the turnout and demographics of those 4 counties, but that's where we saw the threats land.
And lastly, the early voting available, I mean, it's early and it's the day after, but the dynamics of those type of threats on election day in the future, do you advise voters maybe, have you even thought about it, that maybe early is a better thing, so this type of thing doesn't impact what you do?
Yeah, we want voters to know they have options, which was our number one goal to communicate to folks this year, and we'll continue to do that. Secondly, we do want to know that it's easier to vote early because of the potential unknowns that could arise on election day, not just out of your own control, but perhaps within your own sphere. You know, maybe your kid gets sick, maybe you get sick. Voting ahead of time avoids any potential late occurrences from blocking your ability to participate in the election. So we will continue to encourage people to take advantage of other options to vote early. And I was grateful that so many did this year, over almost 3.5 million, which frankly was just at the number we were at in 2020, which was 3.3 voted early, even in the midst of a pandemic. So all that to say is we'll continue with the same encouragement, but our job again is to just make sure people know their options and that they can choose the one that's best for them. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations as to what could be done to speed along the counting process? Because a lot of other states did finish before us.
Mhm.
Detroit was predicting it would finish a lot earlier than
Yeah.
it actually did.
Mm-hmm.
What needs to change in Michigan's system to speed it along?
I would say additional resources were the biggest piece. More people, more machines, that would make the biggest difference. But having, being there in Huntington Place last night and talking with folks as they were waiting for ballots to come from the Detroit Board of Elections to the tabulation center for tabulation, a lot of the delay was just in the meticulous focus on pre-processing every ballot before sending it to be tabulated, checking those signatures, seeing if any need to be cured. Things like that took a lot longer than I think a lot of the workers and leaders in Detroit anticipated. And that was really the first slow gap. And then if you had twice as many people and more resources from the state, that would speed that process up quite significantly. And that is, frankly, in 2020, what we were able to do to actually beat expectations in terms of timing. We had a lot more people and a lot more machines and a lot more resources than had anticipated going into that election, and that helped. So that's the biggest thing. I think that we'll talk with the clerks in the weeks ahead as well to get their insights as to what more, and we'll look into what exactly caused the uploading issue in Wayne County. But in those waiting hours when everything was done being tabulated, with the exception of a few locations in Dearborn, Livonia, Inkster, and parts of Detroit, which were the last ones to come in for Wayne, it really was just kind of looking at our watches and waiting for things to go from being accepted by the county to then being posted on the website. And that just took a long time. And perhaps with more staff and resources, that can speed up that process too.
I don't know what the latest totals are on the Senate race, but could those military and overseas ballots have a big impact?
We'll see. I mean, that's with the process we're in now. And we've always said, particularly in close races, in close statewide races, a lot of those remaining factors could impact it. And so we'll just report things as we know them, I think, at this point, and focus on tabulating all the valid votes and then getting them posted online as they're available.
Are those processed or treated any differently, or do they just get processed as they come in?
They come in just as if they were any other overseas or military ballot. They just, as long as they're postmarked by Tuesday, November 5th, they will count.
Could some of these 6,000 already be counted?
My understanding is that they are still outstanding and have not yet been received at all. And so we may get daily updates there from clerks. They're also that's the number statewide. So you may have an instance where 2 come to one community, 10 come to another, and it may not be instantaneously that we even know or that information's uploaded into the voter file, which is when we learn of it. And so we'll keep tabs on that. I just want folks to know that that's a number that's still outstanding, and they will count if they come in by Tuesday.
The deadline's next Tuesday.
Correct. November 12th. Yeah.
There were some reports online last night that there was an election worker delivering ballots to a car accident in Detroit. Can you confirm if there's any validity to that and give us any information about what happened there?
Yeah, there is validity to that. There was a vehicle transporting ballots that was involved in a crash in Detroit. All the ballots are accounted for. The Detroit Police Department was on the scene to secure everything. And, to the extent that there may be more circulating online or videos or allegations, they're more likely to be misinformation. This was something that occurred. It didn't impact any ballots or any valid votes. And we're continuing to monitor the chatter around that and other things to be able to debunk things as they arise. Yes.
I had a quick question about when counting is expected to be completed. So when is the vote count expected to be completed, and in what areas of the state are you still expecting
The last I checked, which was a few hours ago, there were, as I mentioned, still, and this is since been, they've since completed, but the final communities I was aware of were parts of Wayne County, Livonia, Dearborn, parts of Detroit, which I think have long been done, and Inkster, and then parts of Kalamazoo City, Portage, and one township there. I believe they've all now been finished. They've all now finished. We have a couple more outstanding. We can get you those specifics. It's not a significant number, but we'll get you all those data points as we have them. I think that, again, the thing to remember that, like many of you, because of our decentralized process, we get what's uploaded into the voter file, but sometimes things get posted online before it gets to the voter file. And so what we may have may lag from what you have in other ways or what you're getting from the counties. But there's a process between when something's tabulated to when it gets posted either in the voter file or at the county's website. And that time, that process is where a big chunk of the weight has come from. In other words, just because something's done being tabulated doesn't mean it's instantaneously going to be available online because of the security checks and additional transmission that happens in between that and when it gets posted.
In regards to early voting, can you share a little bit about the turnout you expected with early voting compared to what you saw?
Yeah, early in this process, in late September, early October, we were looking at the number of ballots that were being requested, and they were running far below where we were in 2020. So I actually came into the latter days of this election cycle thinking we'd have a much lower turnout election than we did in 2020. So to me, the fact that we met or may possibly exceeded 2020 overall is a great victory. What caused that victory was the number of people we did not anticipate showing up and voting at early voting centers, 1.2 million overall. We, at best, we're hoping for maybe half of that in our estimates. And to see so many do that showed that our outreach, our education efforts worked. And also the convenience of that method was not lost on a lot of voters. Voters on both sides of the aisle, by the way. And we saw a lot of older voters take advantage of early voting. We saw a lot of new voters, as well as many who had voted before. There were really, Democrats, Republicans, and independents all took advantage of it. We didn't see any notable swings there. It was just a convenient option that people all around the state embraced. And that, to me, for us as election administrators, is really the biggest success story of this election. It was the first time we'd done it. We had 2 earlier statewide elections with much lower user rate of, between 70 and 75,000 in a statewide election total. To go from that to 1.2 million without a hitch, essentially, was extraordinary. And then again, I think when you take that next to the fact that you then had a statewide turnout election of high numbers and along through the night counting process, it really underscores the human aspect of all this work and the exhaustion a lot of workers felt going into the evening. And I think when we look at just the slowness of which things were reported, I would attribute a lot of it to that based on what I saw and talking to people. It wasn't like we just showed up on Monday and were Tuesday night trying to finish everything. Folks had been doing this for a week already. And there was just, a lot of fatigue, and that was real. And that's something that, again, additional resources with more people and more shifts in the future can help mitigate. Yeah.
One more if I could on the threats, just to clarify, what happens from here? Meaning, will there be efforts to see if these were one-offs, if these were coordinated, and perhaps by whom? Who handles an investigation if there is one? What happens here?
Yeah, that we're working with state, federal, and local law enforcement on the variety of threats, the FBI in particular on the bomb threats. So we'll see what accountability happens. I think in our view on a number of things, accountability is going to be key moving forward on a number of issues to ensure that we don't enter an era or continue to be in an era where people spread lies when they're upset about election results or procedures. We should all be able to agree on the rules of the game and then try to win the game based on those rules, as opposed to spreading misinformation to confuse people about the game or about the rules or about the voting process. So that's my focus over the next few months, and really making sure we can continue to protect democracy in that regard and protect truth in the system. But that said, we'll be working with law enforcement to seek the legal accountability that may be necessary for this and any other efforts to deceive our voters. Yeah.
With the Senate race so close,
Yeah.
can you just talk about kind of the rules for recount? what would trigger an automatic recount? Just
Yeah,
procedure.
the closeness of the race would trigger an automatic recount, and of course that would also be up to the candidates themselves. Beyond that, we're going to see as things unfold. Nothing's been triggered yet in that, or no recount has been triggered yet in that or any other race, and there have been no requests for recounts that we've received. But again, it's early on Wednesday, so we'll see how that unfolds.
Is it 2,000 votes that would trigger it? Is it
2.5%, right? I'm sorry? 0.5%. 0.5%
for a statewide?
would trigger
Or
this,
for any?
the statewide
Okay.
recount. So we're still monitoring that, and we'll certainly announce anything that's determined in terms of an automatic recount if and when we reach that. But I don't see that just yet. Yeah. Well, you had your hand up. Sorry. Go ahead.
Big picture question on kind of election denialism. Obviously, Michigan was kind of ground zero for a lot of that stuff, 2021, 2020, is people breaking in voting
Yeah.
machines and everything. I mean, now that Trump has won, like here, the election has gone fairly smoothly as far as we know. Do you think
It's gone smoothly. You can say that. Not as far as we know.
Smoothly.
Yeah.
Big picture, I mean, do you think that kind of goes away now? I know
Yeah,
anyway,
it remains to be seen. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that remain to be seen at this point on the Wednesday morning after a historic election. And so our goal is to see how that plays out, but nothing changes my determination to ensure that we get voters trusted information about our elections, and that we work with everyone to help every citizen get the tools they need to participate in this in every election. That will continue. That work will continue, and we'll see how everything else unfolds. But we'll be ready to, anytime anyone spreads misinformation about our elections or our work in Michigan, we will be there to correct the record swiftly and vociferously.
Asked another way, nobody's claimed this is a rigged election this morning.
No.
Following up on that, for those who watched the scenes outside TCF Center in
Mm.
2020 and Stop the Steal, fraud, protests, and the calm scene at Huntington Place last night, what do you attribute to the difference in the situation on election night here?
I think it was two things that I observed. One, there was a lot more space, both physical space in Huntington Place. It was twice the space they had to complete the process, and then there was a lot more space in terms of time, which spread out the process. There was not scrambling to count, tens of thousands of ballots late into the day and all of the rest. And that, I think, led to a calmer, smoother evening into the morning. And the other thing, though, I saw, and I visited Huntington Place throughout the pre-processing period as well last week, was there were observers, there were challengers, and everyone followed the rules. And it was a very, respectful process. People asked questions when they had them. People answered those questions when they could. And that's how it's supposed to work. So that gave me a lot of hope and optimism going into today, even as I traveled around to precincts in Hamtramck, in Detroit and Southfield yesterday, and spoke with observers and challengers about their concerns or what they were seeing. They all affirmed that everything was going well and it was secure. And that's great. So I think, a combination of all those things, but certainly the time and the space in Detroit in particular led to a smoother, calmer process. And our partnerships with law enforcement also ensured we were ready for any disruptions. And we had various lines of sight set up so that if, for example, a crowd approached Huntington Place, we would know long before they got there that they were on their way and would be able to kind of protect the process even so. So all those planning and procedures were in place too. And I think the bottom line was preparation, and that additional space really helped us ensure smoothness in that particular location. Yeah.
A Democrat who's run twice statewide.
Three times.
3 times. Yeah. Looking at the national results, as a Democrat, what lessons does the party have to take away from what happened yesterday?
Well, when I look in Michigan, what I see is a lot of women winning their races, and that was really encouraging. Certainly seeing Hillary Scholten, Kristen McDonald-Rivet, the two of the women running for the Michigan Supreme Court. And so I think we also saw a lot of women voting in this election that, played out in various different ways. So we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of conversations in the days ahead about next steps and what comes next. But I see Michigan voters at this point showing they're very engaged and enthusiastic, and perhaps have different opinions about the type of leadership they want to see. But we do see women continuing to win elections here in the state. And we also see, the issue of economics and who's going to save someone money being top of mind for many Michiganders of all backgrounds. We'll see. I mean, again, it's so early in the process, it's hard to say. But as I've personally reflected on things, I've and talked with folks, people are very concerned about their pocketbook and wanting to make sure that living in Michigan, raising a family in Michigan, that the costs de-escalate, not escalate. And I think you saw some voters of all financial backgrounds react to that. A lot of first-time voters as well. We saw show up and talk to people about how they were showing up because they wanted to see a tax break. They wanted to see cuts to what they saw as expenses that had increased over the last few years. So the economic policies and issues were top of mind for many citizens. We also talked to many who were concerned about the future of their democracy and showing up with their kids in many cases to show that participation in our democracy is critical for all of us. And that held true across political spectrum, which for me was great to see. And so my hope as well is that we'll continue to see high turnout elections in the state, that we've turned a corner over the last 3 years, and this will be a new tradition to vote early, to vote in large numbers, to bring your kids with you to vote, and to ensure protecting democracy remains a priority for all of us.
What's your reaction to President Trump going back to Washington? Are you concerned?
We'll see. Again, it's so early to really make those prognostications, I guess you could say, but I can tell you I'll have a lot more to say on that in the future. Any other questions, guys? Okay. Thank you.